r/pettyrevenge Stepfamily excluded me, so I exposed Stepmom's lies. I watched my stepfamily load the last suitcase into their rental van through my bedroom window, my stomach churning with a familiar mix of hurt and rage. They were heading to Disney World, all 7 of them, for what my stepmom Cheryl had announced was a bonding trip for the real family. I wasn't invited, obviously. At 19, I was apparently too old for family vacations, according to her, though my step-siblings Jake, 17, and Madison, 15, had somehow made the cut. "Emma, we're leaving," my dad called from downstairs. "There's money on the kitchen counter for groceries." I didn't respond. I couldn't trust myself to speak without screaming. This was the final straw in what had been 4 years of systematic exclusion since Dad married Cheryl when I was 15. But what they didn't know was that I'd been quietly collecting evidence of Cheryl's lies for months. And now, with a week of empty house ahead of me, I finally had the time and space to expose everything. Let me back up and explain how we got here. My parents divorced when I was 12. It was messy, but Dad and I maintained a good relationship. He got me every other weekend and half the holidays, which worked fine until Cheryl entered the picture when I was 14. She came with 2 kids from her previous marriage, Jake and Madison, and from day one, she made it clear that I was an outsider in what she called their blended family. The exclusion started small. Family game nights that happened to be scheduled for weekends when I wasn't there. Movie nights that got moved to Sunday evenings when Dad would drive me back to Mom's house. Birthday parties for Jake and Madison where I was told I could stop by if I wanted, but wasn't really invited to participate. When Dad and Cheryl got married in a small ceremony, which I learned about 2 days before it happened, things escalated. Suddenly, I had a list of new house rules that applied only to me. I couldn't eat food from the pantry without asking. "That's for the kids who live here full-time," Cheryl explained. I had to knock before entering any room, including the living room. I was given a specific towel for showers and told not to use the others. My belongings were confined to the guest bedroom, which Cheryl constantly threatened to turn into her craft room. The worst part was how Dad went along with it all. Cheryl had this way of framing her cruelty as practicality. "Emma only visits twice a month, so it doesn't make sense to include her in our weekly routines. We can't plan family activities around someone who isn't here most of the time. The other kids need stability, and constantly changing plans for a visitor is disruptive." Dad, desperate to make his new marriage work, bought into every word. But I started noticing inconsistencies in Cheryl's stories about 6 months ago, around Christmas time. She told Dad that she couldn't afford to get me a present because money was tight, they'd spent everything on the kids' gifts. But then I overheard her on the phone with her sister, bragging about the expensive purse she bought herself for Christmas. When I mentioned this to Dad, Cheryl smoothly explained that the purse was actually a gift from her mother, and how dare I eavesdrop on her private conversations. That's when I started paying closer attention and keeping records. I began screenshotting her social media posts, taking photos of receipts she left around the house, and recording conversations on my phone, perfectly legal in our state as long as one party, me, consented. What I discovered was that Cheryl was a pathological liar who had built her entire relationship with my father on deception. The financial lies were the most obvious. Cheryl constantly claimed to be struggling with money, asking Dad to cover her car payment, Jake's football equipment, Madison's dance classes, and their family groceries. She'd tear up talking about how hard it was to make ends meet as a single mom, even though she was married to Dad now. He was paying for everything while she played the victim. But her bank statements, which she carelessly left on the kitchen counter multiple times, told a different story. She had over $40,000 in her checking account and was receiving $2,800 monthly in alimony from her ex-husband, payments that were supposed to continue for another 3 years. Meanwhile, she was hitting up my dad for $1,500 plus every month for necessities. Then there were the lies about her kids. She constantly bragged to Dad about Jake's athletic achievements and Madison's academic excellence, painting them as perfect angels who never caused any trouble. She'd contrast this with snide comments about how I was difficult and attention-seeking whenever I was around. The reality? Jake had been suspended twice this school year for vaping on campus and had been caught cheating on a major math test. Madison had been in detention multiple times for talking back to teachers and had failed 2 classes last semester. I knew this because they'd loudly discussed it on phone calls when they thought no one was listening. But the most damaging lies were about her ex-husband Marcus and their divorce. She told Dad that Marcus was abusive and that she'd fled the marriage in fear for her and her children's safety. She'd shown him what she claimed were threatening text messages and emails from Marcus. Dad, naturally, was outraged and supportive, even offering to contact police if Marcus ever showed up at their house. The truth was very different. I'd been piecing together the real story through various sources, Marcus's social media, court documents that were public record, and overheard phone conversations between Cheryl and her friends where she'd slip up and tell different versions of events. Marcus wasn't abusive. Cheryl had cheated on him with multiple men during their marriage, including at least one affair that lasted over a year. Marcus had filed for divorce after finding explicit messages on her phone. The threatening texts she'd shown Dad were actually Marcus begging her to go to couples counseling and save their marriage. She'd edited screenshots to make his desperate pleas look sinister. The most sickening part. She'd coached Jake and Madison to lie about their father. Whenever Dad was around, they'd make comments about being scared of Marcus or glad Mom got them away from him. But I'd overheard them on multiple occasions talking about fun weekends with their dad, planning activities for their next visit, and complaining that Mom wouldn't let them see him more often. Cheryl was systematically alienating those kids from their father while using false abuse allegations to gain sympathy and control in her new relationship. It was disgusting. But every time I tried to hint at any of this to Dad, Cheryl would turn it around. I was jealous of her relationship with him. I was trying to cause drama because I couldn't accept that he'd moved on from Mom. I was being manipulative and vindictive, just like my mother, she'd add with a sweet smile. Dad would take her side every single time. The Disney World trip was announced 3 weeks before they left. Dad came to me with an apologetic expression and explained that Cheryl thought it would be good for her kids to have special one-on-one time with him, and since I was busy with college classes anyway, wouldn't it make more sense for me to skip this one? "It's not that we don't want you there," he'd said, not meeting my eyes. It's just that Jake and Madison still need time to adjust to having a stepfather, and adding more family dynamics might be overwhelming. Jake and Madison had been calling him Dad for 2 years. They were more than adjusted. But I just nodded and said I understood. Because finally, I was going to have the time and privacy I needed to compile everything I discovered into an organized, undeniable case against Cheryl. I waited until their van disappeared around the corner before getting to work. My first stop was Cheryl's craft room, formerly the home office where she kept all her important documents. She'd never explicitly forbidden me from entering, probably because she assumed I had no interest in her scrapbooking supplies. What she didn't know was that she also stored her financial records, legal documents, and printed emails in clearly labeled folders in her desk. Over the next 2 hours, I photographed everything relevant. Bank statements going back 18 months showing her actual financial situation. Copies of alimony agreements revealing her monthly payments from Marcus. Credit card statements showing expensive purchases she'd made while crying poverty to Dad. Court documents from her divorce that told the real story of her infidelity and Marcus's desperate attempts to maintain access to his children. But the smoking gun was a folder labeled Insurance that actually contained printed emails between Cheryl and her lawyer. She'd been exploring the possibility of filing a restraining order against Marcus based on escalating threats and harassment. The lawyer had responded asking for evidence of these threats. Cheryl's reply, dated just 2 weeks ago, was chilling. I'm still working on documenting everything. Marcus is too smart to put anything obviously threatening in writing, but I'm sure I can find ways to make his normal communications look more sinister. She was literally planning to fabricate evidence against her ex-husband. Next, I went through her computer. Cheryl wasn't particularly tech-savvy and had saved her password, Madison 2009, on a sticky note in her desk drawer. Her email account was a goldmine of incriminating information. There were emails to her sister complaining about Dad's clingy daughter and strategizing about how to minimize my presence in their lives. I swear, if I have to pretend to like that girl much longer, I'm going to lose it, she'd written. But David is still guilty about the divorce, so I have to be careful how I handle the Emma situation. I'm working on gradually making it clear that his loyalty should be to his wife and the kids who live with him full-time. There were communications with Jake and Madison's school that directly contradicted everything she told Dad about their academic and behavioral performance. Emails from teachers about missed assignments, disciplinary meetings, and requests for parent conferences that she'd ignored. But the worst were her communications with a private investigator she'd hired to dig up dirt on Marcus. She wasn't trying to prove he was abusive, she was trying to find anything she could use against him. The PI had reported back that Marcus appeared to be a devoted father and upstanding citizen with no criminal record, no concerning behaviors, and nothing that could be used to support claims of abuse or threats. Cheryl's response. Keep looking. There has to be something. Check his social media again, talk to his coworkers, see if any of his neighbors have complaints. I don't care how small it is, I just need something I can work with. I spent the entire first day organizing and cataloging evidence. By evening, I had over 200 photos and screenshots documenting Cheryl's lies about finances, her kids' behavior, her ex-husband, and her true feelings about me and my relationship with Dad. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted to understand the full scope of her deception, and I had 6 more days to investigate. On day 2, I decided to do something that felt slightly stalkerish but ultimately necessary. I drove to Jake and Madison's school to see if I could learn more about their actual situation there. I wasn't sure what I hoped to accomplish, but I figured it was worth a try. I got lucky. As I sat in the parking lot trying to figure out my next move, I recognized one of Madison's teachers walking to her car. Mrs. Patterson had been my English teacher 3 years ago and had always been kind to me. Emma, she called when she spotted me. What brings you by the old stomping grounds? I made up something about considering taking dual enrollment classes there next semester, and we chatted for a few minutes. Then, probably because I looked upset, she asked if everything was okay at home. You know, I've been wondering about that myself, she said when I gave a vague response. Madison has seemed really stressed lately, and some things she's mentioned about her family situation don't quite add up. Plus, we've had a hard time getting her mother to respond to our communications about her grades. This opened the door for me to carefully probe for more information. What Mrs. Patterson told me was heartbreaking. Madison had been acting out in class, but not in the typical bratty teenager way Cheryl had described to Dad. She was withdrawn, anxious, and had been caught crying in the bathroom multiple times. When teachers asked what was wrong, Madison would clam up, but she'd made a few concerning comments about being scared to disappoint people and feeling like she was caught in the middle of something. Mrs. Patterson had tried to schedule a conference with Cheryl multiple times to discuss Madison's declining performance and apparent emotional distress. Cheryl had canceled 3 scheduled meetings and ignored follow-up emails. The thing is, Mrs. Patterson said carefully, Madison has mentioned missing her dad a lot. She's written some assignments about him that suggest they had a really close relationship before her parents divorced. But when we've suggested family counseling resources that might help with the transition, her mother insists that contact with her father is not in Madison's best interest. It doesn't match what we're seeing from Madison at all. My heart broke for my stepsister. I'd always seen her as complicit in Cheryl's treatment of me, but now I realized she was just as much a victim of her mother's manipulation. She was being used as a pawn in Cheryl's sick game, turned against her own father and probably confused about what was true and what wasn't. Mrs. Patterson gave me her card and asked me to have Madison call her if she ever needed someone to talk to. Sometimes kids feel more comfortable reaching out when they're ready rather than being put on the spot in a formal meeting. I promised to pass along the message, though I wasn't sure how to do that without revealing my investigative activities. Day 3 brought another breakthrough. I decided to reach out directly to Marcus. This felt like crossing a line, but I justified it by telling myself that he deserved to know what Cheryl was planning with the restraining order. I found his Facebook profile and sent him a message explaining who I was and asking if he'd be willing to talk. He responded within an hour, asking if we could meet at a coffee shop near his work. He seemed eager to talk, which made me think he'd been hoping someone would reach out. Marcus turned out to be nothing like the monster Cheryl had described. He was soft-spoken, clearly heartbroken about his limited access to his kids, and desperate to understand what had gone so wrong in his family. I keep thinking I must have done something terrible that I'm not remembering, he told me over coffee. Cheryl and the kids act like I'm some kind of threat, but I honestly have no idea what I supposedly did. I've asked Cheryl directly, I've asked the kids, I've even asked Cheryl's family, but no one will give me specifics. They just say I should know what I did, or that it's not their place to explain. When I asked about the text messages Cheryl had shown Dad, Marcus looked genuinely confused. He pulled out his phone and showed me their actual message history. It was heartbreaking, just a father trying desperately to maintain some connection with his children while being systematically shut out. Can I see her? He'd written about Madison after she'd apparently had a panic attack at school. I know she's upset, and I just want to make sure she's okay. Please don't shut me out like this, he'd texted after Jake had missed 3 scheduled visitations in a row. I love them so much, and I don't understand what's happening. I'll do whatever you want, counseling, mediation, anything. Just please don't take my kids away from me. These were the messages Cheryl had somehow twisted into evidence of threatening behavior. Marcus also showed me photos from the kids' visits with him, recent photos that proved they'd been seeing him regularly despite Cheryl's claims to Dad that she'd had to cut off contact for safety reasons. Jake and Madison looked happy and relaxed in these pictures, nothing like the scared, traumatized kids Cheryl described. The worst part, Marcus said, is that I can see them pulling away from me. They've started acting suspicious and distant during our visits, like they're looking for signs that I'm this awful person their mother says I am. It's like they want to believe her but can't quite reconcile it with their actual experience with me. I told Marcus about Cheryl's emails to the private investigator and her plans for the restraining order. He went pale. If she gets a restraining order based on false allegations, I could lose my job, he said. I work in finance, any kind of legal action like that would have to be reported to my employer. And forget about seeing Jake and Madison. Even if I eventually prove the allegations are false, the damage will be done. We talked for almost 2 hours. Marcus was clearly a devoted father who was being systematically destroyed by his ex-wife's lies. But he also gave me insight into Cheryl's patterns of behavior that helped me understand what she was doing to my family. She did the same thing to me that she's doing to your dad, he explained. At first, I was her hero for rescuing her from her difficult first marriage. She love-bombed me with attention and gratitude, made me feel like I was the perfect man who finally understood her. But then she started creating drama and chaos, always positioning herself as the victim who needed protecting. She'd manufacture